Good evening again. The process is going to be exactly the same. We have two candidates for the county coroner position, Russel Nelson and Dr. Brent Blue, and each will have a 1-minute opening statement, and that will begin with Russel Nelson, and then Brent will have the second one. First question then will come to Brent Blue, and then we will rotate back and forth after that. The panelists do have the opportunity to ask a few follow-up questions if they choose. And at the end, we will have, again, a closing statement, 1-minute statement, and Dr. Brent Blue will have the first of the closing statements. One announcement, which everybody has gone out in the hall isn't going to hear, and that is the video of this can be found online tomorrow, I think, at tclib.org/vote. So if you go to the library webpage, I think you'd find it from there, but tclib.org/vote. So let's go ahead and kick this off. Russell?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name is Russel Nelson. I am running for the post of Teton County Coroner. My training in this area is about 25 years, 30 years, 27 actually, of forensic anthropology. I have examined, analyzed, and reported human remains in a variety of conditions from last night in the desert to 12,000 years ago on the Brazilian plateau. I've done extensive field archaeology work in Mongolia, on Guam. I've worked on Guam in Italy. I've worked around the world, generally as the examiner for human remains that are recovered on site archaeologically, and then for the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office doing forensic casework down in Tucson. I thank you for attending, and we'll get this underway.
Hi, I'm Brent Blue, and thank you for staying this late. It's not the most exciting race in the county government this year, but we're here. I've been a physician in Jackson for over 30 years, and the main reason I'm running for this office is because I really think that the quality of the coroner's office needs to be brought up into the 21st century. There's never been a medical person who's been responsible for the coroner's office. It's not required by law, but it just makes common sense. And I think that a person who has a medical background is the right person to function as coroner in this county. The coroner's office needs more transparency. It needs to work better with families of the deceased, and it needs to work better with law enforcement. And I think I can bring this office into the 21st century, as I said.
First question then will be to Dr. Brent Blue. Jonathan?
You got at this a little bit, but why does it matter who is county coroner? What difference does it make to Teton County's public who is the county coroner?
It's important for, one thing, it's very important for families to know exactly why someone died. It's not, you can't just say, oh, they died of a heart attack or they died of blunt trauma. But what was the real reason? How did they die? Did they suffer pain? Those are questions that a lot of families ask and deserve the right to know. From a scientific point of view, I think it's important for us to really know what somebody died of. What's the right thing, the correct thing to put on a death certificate? What's important for our statistics and our knowledge of just life in general. And what I mean by that is that now we know, and on the death certificates now, we include whether or not a person was a tobacco user, because that's an important aspect to our demographics and knowing how much of a problem is tobacco in our lives, in our health, and the welfare of our county.
It matters who's the county coroner. The coroner is a forensic investigator. You are charged with making a determination as to the cause and manner of death and recognizing the expert testimony of the people that you work with. You have to know your investigating crew. You have to understand You also have to be able to go out and do scene site investigations. Site investigations are basically legal archaeology, where you have to look at what's on the ground, look at that kind of evidence. With experience in that sort of thing, I think that it's very important that the coroner be as much investigator as medical legal forensic expert.
Okay. All right. Whoa, we can hear me. Both of you have made much during this campaign of the expertise that your profession gives you. Could you please explain for the audience a little bit about what your profession actually is and how that expertise qualifies you to identify remains and cause of death?
I'm a forensic anthropologist. Forensic anthropology is the application of the principles, research methodologies, and documentation of physical anthropology to questions of a legal nature. Physical anthropology is the study of the human animal, developmental trajectory, skeletal anatomy, physical anatomy, growth and development, and age-related changes through sexual dimorphism, regional differences. We would call that race at one point in time. As a physical anthropologist, this is, what your expertise is being able to work through those sorts of issues in a skeleton, in a person. You also recognize pathology and traumas to bones such as blunt force or sharp implement sort of things, and so that's what my specialty is.
I think that as a physician, one of the things we do every day is we make diagnoses. In essence, it's an investigation with each patient that walks in the door. I think it's having a medical background is extremely important in trying to determine the cause of death, what the real cause of death was. We have to be able to interpret medical records that are received. We have to be able to interpret toxicology reports that come back. We interpret what a forensic pathologist may have reported during an autopsy. I think these are all important things that have to be assembled, and a medical background gives the person doing that a tremendous advantage. The other side is that as a physician, I've had not only training but a long tenure of experience dealing with families in these critical situations, because it's a tremendous issue for families who lost a loved one unexpectedly, and almost all these deaths are unexpected. That being able to deal with their grief, to be able to deal with their trauma is important.
Question?
No.
Okay. I should have mentioned before the next question comes up, that Vicki is still in the back with cards and pencils, and if you'd like to submit a question to the panelists, please do so. So the next question comes from David then.
As coroner, it's likely that you're going to be responding to the death of someone that you know in the county. How do you handle such a situation, and how would you ensure that the gathering and release of information is the same for someone that you know that you do not know?
Well, I do that on a regular basis now, not only, with people who are dying or people who have died or that are patients of mine or patients that I know that have been treated by someone else. So I really don't see that as being much of an issue. I do think that the coroner's office has not had as much transparency as they should have had in the past as far as cause of death. But it's also important to respect the privacy of families of the deceased. So I don't see that. This is a small community. Everybody knows everybody. Whether we have to deal with somebody who we know who's died versus somebody we don't know, I'm not sure that really makes much of a difference.
I would echo that somewhat. It is a small community, and anybody can go at any time. And if it is your job to deal with and assess that individual, that person's death, then you have to do it. And you have to treat everybody the same. It's just, that's the job.
Okay. In terms of the general transparency of the coroner's office, what kinds of information are appropriate to release in the wake of a death and on what timeline? And what kinds of information on the makeup and processes of the office should be readily available to the public?
I don't have the state statutes on that in front right now, and I have not trained for this specific. I know you have to go to the police academy over in Douglas and take a training session, so they fill you in on that kind of information. In general, you wouldn't release anything sensationalist. You wouldn't, you know, the family should be the first one to know and the first people to have that information. And at that point, there is going to be a public right to know with the coroner's report. I think the newspaper can access that.
Well, it's important to notify the family deserves notification, next of kin deserve notification before a name of deceased is made public, and that's pretty standard across coroner's office and the state of Wyoming. The diagnosis, the cause of death is public knowledge and is on the death certificate, which is basically public knowledge. Obviously, things like pictures of the deceased, pictures of the scene do not need to be released. There may be a right to know in certain situations if it's a criminal action. One of the things I think that has not been reported in the coroner's office that deserves to be reported is the results of toxicology screens. Many times we have accidental deaths, and what never seems to ever make it to the public eye is the results of toxicology and whether drugs or alcohol were involved in a death. And I think that's critically important.
If either one of you wants to take a stab on the second half of that question, the makeup and the processes of the office.
You know, I'm sorry, I didn't really hear what you'd say, that part of the question.
I believe the second half of this question was what kinds of information on the makeup and processes of the office should be readily available to the public.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by the makeup.
How the office functions. Who is your deputy coroner? How do you reach you?
Well, the office you can have, I mean, you can appoint as many deputy coroners as you want to at this point. It's a matter of really finances on how many deputy coroners. There are currently 3. One that is there quite a bit of the time, and 2 that are more part-time. The function, I mean, use cell phones and the sheriff's radio network are the way it currently works. And it's a pretty simple process. There's not really much else. As far as process, the coroner's office is south of town by the animal shelter, and the most significant process that goes on there, in addition to the normal paperwork, is the cataloging and returning of personal possessions of the deceased.
I'm going to pass on that one. I don't have that information.
Oh, I do think it was more how much of that information should be available.
Oh, as to how it works, that should be public information. I mean, the public should certainly have access to that, and if they're interested, they should be able to ask those questions and have them answered in a forthright manner.
Next
Okay.
question.
To Brent, I believe.
I think it goes to Dr. Blue, and I think it's from you, Jonathan.
That's right, yeah. Why is this a partisan office? As a Democrat, how will you handle it differently than Russell as a Republican and vice versa?
It is the reason it's a partisan office is because the sheriff is a partisan office, and in the state of Wyoming, the sheriff is the coroner is the only person who can arrest the sheriff, and that's the only reason this is a partisan office.
So are you going to bust him to get your permit back? I don't think there's any difference in the way you treat anybody. This, in very many ways, it's very much like the assessor's office, because somebody threw that question at Dawn yesterday. It's a partisan, like Brent said, it's partisan because the sheriff's department or the sheriff's office is partisan, but once you get elected, I mean, you treat everybody the same. You're a public servant.
And the sheriff can arrest the coroner?
Well, if the coroner's doing something wrong,
Oh, okay. Just checking.
that's his job.
Okay.
So in a similar vein, what are the benefits of having it be an elected position? And do you believe that Wyoming should consider a change to a medical examiner system?
I do, actually. The benefits of having it be an elected position, the people get to make a choice, but hopefully that would be an informed choice. Should Wyoming move to a medical examiner system? I think Wyoming should have a medical examiner team, because you don't just have the ME, you've got, other people to help perform those tasks. If we're sending our medical legal autopsies from southeast Wyoming, goes out to Denver or out to Rapid City or up to Billings or out to Pocatello or down to Salt Lake, then there's a lot of revenue going out of the state. Not to mention that if you try and then it turns into a headache if the thing goes to court and those people, you try and get that pathologist to come back and testify, then you're going to have a lot of court, or a lot of you're going to have to pay expert witness fees all over the place. And that can turn into, sometimes they just don't want to come all the way out to do that. So yes, Wyoming should definitely have, and that's one of the things I would very much like to try and push for, is to get a Wyoming medical examiner team, whether it's in Casper or, and travels, or we send our work there, but that needs to be explored.
I think a medical examiner system is a great system, except in a small state it's very expensive. And to have a medical examiner system, I'm not sure we can afford. It would be great if we had a forensic pathologist in the state of Wyoming. Currently we don't, and so that most things go to the Pocatello or to northern Colorado. That's the best system. I've worked with that system in San Francisco. I've worked with that system in Louisville, Kentucky, where I grew up. It's unfortunate that we can't afford that system, but we're a small state, and one of the reasons that I'm running is I feel that, at least as a physician, I can help push towards that type of system, even though I don't think we'll ever have one here.
This is an audience question, and I think it's a good one. Is the coroner the final say on the cause of death? Is there oversight for this? And what if the cause of death is disputed?
That's a great question. The coroner is the final determination, makes the final determination of the cause of death in the state of Wyoming. I think that the only way that would be overturned without the consent of the coroner would be through the state court system. I'm sure as coroner, I would certainly listen to any other evidence that someone brought to bear on a case that would change the cause of death. But I think that to overturn the coroner's decision would be in the state court.
I can't dispute that. I think that's very likely the case. The coroner is sort of the final say. The person who makes the cause of death determination is going to be a forensic pathologist, but I believe that person would inform the coroner's decision, or as the anthropologist would inform the pathologist's decision in many cases, as the specialist that's on the particular case.
How would you handle a case that was beyond your skills, and what resources would you look for to draw on?
You have to farm it out. I mean, if it's beyond your skills, I mean, I'm not, as Dr. Blue isn't authorized or licensed to perform a medical legal autopsy. Not not happening. You have to send that to somebody that's qualified to do that. Am I qualified to make a dental identification on a set of decomposing remains? Yes, I can do that. But if it's something, you know, when it goes beyond what you're authorized or sort of trained to do, you should bump it up to somebody that's got the qualifications to take care of that.
One of the advantages of being a physician is that there's a lot of things that I can do and make determinations about without getting outside help. However, I can assure you that if we were to find some bones up somewhere in the backcountry, that I'd probably call Russ to ask for help in determining whether those were human bones or how old they were or other issues related to it. Just like we consult forensic pathologists for certain kinds of autopsies that need forensic pathologists, but we also can use our local pathologists if it doesn't require a specific forensic autopsy. But even then, the forensic pathologist will give us an anatomical and possibly a cellular diagnosis, but they may not receive those. We receive the toxicology reports, things like that, somebody has to bring that all together, and that's really the job of the coroner.
Listening to you guys, you have two very different skill sets, and they seem to overlap a little bit around the coroner job. So the question is, given your different skill sets, why would you be a better coroner than the other candidate?
Well, I just feel that as a physician, I have a larger set that applies to this area. I mean, most of the deaths that are in Teton County are people who have died recently and have medical or physical issues that have caused that death. I fully respect Russ's skill set, and for certain situations, he would have great knowledge and great ability to determine the cause of death or what the circumstances may have been. But in the general scheme of things in this county, for the type of deaths we have in this county, I think that as a physician that I have a better skill set.
I think that in this situation, I would have to say that if I would be a good coroner for this county, because if I got this job, this would be my only job. That's what I would focus on. I'm not trying to do several other business interests or other things going on in my life somewhere else. I'm focused here on this. The anthropology that I can bring to it, the forensic archaeology, if you will, investigative skills, I think would apply very well in cases in Teton County. We live in a place that's got, fast rivers, big mountains, and a lot of traffic, and a lot of that sort of thing requires some level of investigation, field investigation, that I think that I would be able to bring to the table.
I'd like to rip a page out of Jonathan's playbook and have you ask each other one question.
I'm trying to think of a good question. You want to ask first?
No, go ahead.
Well, is your multiplicity of business interests going to affect this?
Well, it's a great question. It's one of the reasons that I have another doctor who's joined our practice who's to take off a significant amount of my patient load so that I have the ability to spend the time it's required for this position. And given that we have about 30 deaths a year, and looking at the amount of time the current coroner spends, I don't think that's much of an issue.
Now you get to ask Russell a question.
I guess, Russell, and I really respect your abilities, don't get me wrong, but do you really think that as an anthropologist that you have the skill set that would be as well-rounded for this position as a physician?
Yes. I'm actually married to a physician, and she's a darn good one. And I have been with Judy when she has been consoling families and dealing with people like that. I've listened to nights of dictations and been there through a lot of that sort of thing, and I believe that I could handle that just fine. Yes, I think that as an anthropologist, I would do a fine job.
Okay, the next question goes to Dr. Brent Blue from Emma.
Yes. What kinds of relationships do you currently have with the agencies you might be required to work with, such as the various federal law enforcement agencies, local law enforcement agencies, and medical community? And how would you build and cultivate relationships you do not have?
Well, I was the jail physician for over 20 years, and so I've had a pretty strong and close relationship with the Sheriff's Department for that time. Worked with the city police on in several different areas, whether it be the Drug and Alcohol Advisory Board that I was on with the governor's office, to working with the city police on the original car seat program we had in Teton County. As far as federal government, I haven't had a whole lot of experience with the FBI, although I've had some contact with them, but I've had a great deal of contact with the Secret Service because we provided their health care while they were here. So I've worked with a lot of different levels of government. One of the things I would do if elected, in fact, I was talking to Keith Gingrey about this today because he's the lawyer responsible for the coroner's office in the county, would be to meet with all the vested parties in city and county government and law enforcement and make sure that we had a good game plan going forward.
My work has been mostly on the international scene as well as at the national level. I'm an anthropologist with the Disaster Mortuary Operational Response Team organized under Health and Human Services. And we did the identifications during the Katrina and Rita recoveries, and that we do those sorts of mass disasters. As far as local and county, county and state law enforcement and agencies, of course, you would go meet with them and introduce yourself, and it's a question of building relationships, or person to person, and so you'd have to go talk to them and get to know them and build those relationships.
Okay, this next question will be the last question, then we'll go to the closing statements.
My guess is that when you guys were growing up, neither of you really aspired to be a coroner. Maybe you did.
How do you know?
I could be wrong. I said my guess. But just the fundamental question, why do you want this job?
I would like this job because I feel like I grew up in Jackson. I come from an old family here. My ancestors have served the county in various different capacities in the state. My great-grandfather was Wyoming's first state game warden. My grandfather was a county commissioner when Millward Simpson called and said, "You better shut down gambling in Jackson." And I feel like I would like to give something back to my community. I grew up in this town. It's been home forever, and I have gone out and I feel like gotten a good deal of experience out in the world and through the educational system. And I'd like to bring some of that back home and serve my home people.
I strictly approach this as a public service. I think that the coroner's office has been poorly run and poorly managed over the 30 years or so that I've been in this county. And I really feel that it needs to be brought up into a scientifically based, organized, methodical well-run office, and I don't see that. And I can assure you I don't need another job, but I can assure you that I'm really doing this as part of my feeling that this county deserves to have a quality coroner's office.
Closing statements, and Dr. Brent Blue will have the first one of those, and Russell will conclude then with his closing statement. 1 minute apiece.
Well, I think that when it comes down to the people in this room, I guess the tough question really is if you had somebody in your family die suddenly and you had to deal with a coroner, would you prefer to deal with a very nice anthropologist, or would you rather deal with a physician? And I think that's really the question you have to answer, and that's one of the reasons I'm running.
In your ads, you characterized what I do as a physical anthropologist as basically a television show. I think that the physical anthropologists, the forensic anthropologists who are members of the Joint POW-MIA Accounting Command, recovering American servicemen from our various theaters of war since World War II, would probably take issue with that. The forensic anthropologists documenting human rights abuses in places like Rwanda and Somalia and Central America would probably take issue with that, as would the forensic anthropologists working as coroners and for coroners and medical examiners throughout the United States. I feel like that's a short-sighted statement. I am interested in bringing this to this job everything that I am capable of giving it, and I would thank you very much for your vote on the 4th of November. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the fourth of the candidate forums. I'd like to recognize and thank David Zucker, Emma Bricey, good, got it, Jonathan Schechter, and certainly our candidates, Russel Nelson and Dr. Brent Blue, and all the others that have come before. And I'd like to thank you, and certainly, as a League of Women Voters member, strongly encourage you and everybody you know to come out to vote on November 4th. Thank you very much, and we'll see you.